Every empire throughout history has fallen the same way. Not through conquest, not through revolution, through the systematic control of resources that others believed would always be available. Rome controlled salt routes, Britain controlled sea lanes, America controlled oil flows. China is about to control something far more critical than any of these. Something embedded in every smartphone, every electric vehicle, every solar panel, every piece of artificial intelligence infrastructure that powers the modern world. They call it silver, but that understates what it really represents. Silver is the nervous system of technological civilization, and China just severed the global supply. What I'm about to reveal isn't speculation about future market movements. It's documentation of the most sophisticated resource colonization strategy in modern history. A plan so precisely executed that it makes previous commodity corners look primitive by comparison. The revelation is mathematical, not emotional. The outcome is inevitable, not probable. And the timeline is measured in months, not years. China didn't just implement export controls. They activated a weapon that took 30 years to position and deploy. Understanding what they accomplished and why it guarantees 500% silver appreciation requires grasping the true scope of modern technological dependency on a metal most people think of as jewelry. The master plan, 30 years in development. What happened on January 1st, 2026 appeared to be routine trade policy. Export licensing requirements for strategic materials, standard regulatory oversight for critical resources. The appearance was deception. The reality was activation. China has spent 3 decades building the world's most comprehensive silver refining infrastructure, not to serve global markets, to control them. By 2025, China controlled 60 to 70% of global refined silver production. This wasn't market evolution. This was strategic positioning disguised as industrial development. The refining capacity that China built wasn't sized for domestic demand. It was sized for global control. They processed silver from mines worldwide, created dependency among international users, then activated restrictions once control was absolute. Starting January 1st, 2026, China implemented export licensing that eliminated hundreds of smaller suppliers overnight. Only 44 companies received approval to export silver, 44 companies to serve global demand that previously relied on hundreds of sources. The licensing criteria weren't designed to regulate quality or ensure fair trade. They were designed to eliminate competition and create artificial scarcity while maintaining domestic supply security for Chinese manufacturers. Companies that supplied global markets for decades discovered they no longer existed in the new system. Their supply chains, their customer relationships, their business models, eliminated by regulatory decree designed to look like administrative efficiency. This is how modern resource colonization operates, through administrative processes that appear routine while accomplishing strategic objectives that reshape global power relationships. The rare earth. Precedent, tested strategy, scaled impact. China's silver strategy isn't experimental. They perfected the approach with rare earth elements, demonstrated its effectiveness, and scaled it to a resource with exponentially greater strategic importance. Between 2010 and 2012, China used rare earth export restrictions to cripple international technology companies, force supply chain relocations, and establish permanent manufacturing advantages in high-tech sectors. The rare earth precedent proved that controlling critical material inputs provides more sustainable competitive advantage than direct technology competition or traditional trade protection. But rare earth elements, while important, represent specialized applications in specific technology sectors. Silver represents the fundamental electrical conductivity that makes all modern technology possible. Every electronic device, every electrical connection, every piece of power management equipment depends on silver's unique properties. Properties that cannot be substituted without accepting significant performance degradation. China's rare earth strategy affected companies that used specialized materials. China's silver strategy affects the entire technological foundation of modern civilization. The elevation of silver to strategic material status, placing it under the same export controls as rare earth elements, represents acknowledgement that silver provides even greater leverage over global technology development than rare earths. This isn't trade policy. This is technological warfare executed through resource control mechanisms that appear legitimate while accomplishing strategic domination objectives. The mathematical devastation, 5-year deficit, becomes acute crisis. The silver market was already experiencing unprecedented stress before China activated their export restrictions. 5 consecutive years of structural deficits had depleted global inventories to critically low levels. Global silver demand reached 1.24 billion ounces in 2025, while total supply, including mining and recycling, provided only 1.01 billion ounces. The 230 million ounce annual deficit equals the entire production of Mexico, the world's largest silver-producing country. This means the global economy has been consuming silver equivalent to eliminating one entire country's production beyond what the world can sustainably produce. For 5 consecutive years. The mathematics are unforgiving. New silver mines require 8 to 12 years to develop, and most silver production comes as a byproduct of copper and zinc mining. Higher silver prices don't directly incentivize silver mining because companies mine copper and zinc for primary revenues. The structural deficit reflects fundamental reality that industrial silver consumption has outpaced the Earth's ability to provide new supply through conventional mining operations. China's export restrictions transformed manageable long-term supply constraints into immediate existential crisis for global industry. Companies that previously planned silver procurement months in advance now compete for limited spot supply with no certainty about future availability. The deficit mathematics become exponentially worse when Chinese domestic demand competes with reduced export availability. Chinese manufacturers require increasing silver quantities for electric vehicle production, solar panel manufacturing, and technology infrastructure development. Every ounce consumed domestically in China reduces global export availability, while international demand continues growing from renewable energy deployment, electric vehicle adoption, and artificial intelligence infrastructure expansion. Inventory collapse. The 70% drawdown. The supply deficit wouldn't create immediate crisis conditions if substantial above-ground inventories existed to buffer shortages, but those inventories have been systematically depleted to levels that threaten industrial operations. COMEX registered silver inventories have declined nearly 70% since 2020. The registered inventory represents silver immediately available for delivery to futures contract holders, the primary mechanism for international price discovery and supply allocation. London Bullion Market Association vaults have lost approximately 40% of their silver holdings. LBMA serves as the global hub for physical precious metals trading, and inventory declines there affect worldwide supply availability. Shanghai Futures Exchange inventories have fallen to their lowest levels in over a decade, despite China's production dominance. Even Chinese domestic inventories are being drawn down to meet expanding manufacturing requirements. At current consumption rates, some industrial regions maintain only 30 to 45 days of accessible silver reserves. This represents emergency-level inventory that would typically trigger immediate procurement action under normal market conditions. The problem is that normal market conditions no longer exist. Companies seeking to rebuild silver inventory discover that supply simply isn't available at any price that makes economic sense for their operations. The inventory depletion creates conditions where any supply disruption, mining problems, transportation delays, refining capacity constraints immediately threatens industrial production across multiple sectors simultaneously. When global inventory buffers disappear, the system becomes vulnerable to cascade failures, where problems in one area create crisis conditions everywhere else. The physical paper divergence, $80 versus $30 exposes market fiction. The most revealing evidence of silver market breakdown comes from price divergences that expose the complete failure of paper-based price discovery mechanisms. While COMEX silver futures trade between $30 and $35 per ounce, physical silver in Shanghai commands prices above $80 per ounce. This $50 spread represents the largest commodity price divergence in modern market history. The divergence reveals that paper markets no longer reflect physical reality. Futures contracts trade at artificial prices maintained through financial engineering, while physical silver commands prices that reflect actual supply scarcity. This price divergence doesn't represent temporary market inefficiency. It represents the breakdown of arbitrage mechanisms that previously kept global silver prices aligned across different markets and contract types. When physical premiums reach 150% above paper prices, it indicates complete loss of confidence in paper delivery systems and massive migration of demand toward physical ownership. The Shanghai premiums reflect not just local supply tightness, but recognition among sophisticated buyers that securing physical silver takes priority over paper profits in an environment where supply availability cannot be guaranteed. International buyers willing to pay $80 per ounce for Shanghai physical silver while refusing $35 COMEX contracts understand that paper positions become worthless when underlying physical supply doesn't exist for delivery. The divergence also exposes that Chinese buyers have access to physical silver through domestic markets, while international buyers face increasing difficulty securing supply through traditional channels. Industrial panic. Elon Musk's public warning. The severity of the silver supply crisis became undeniable when one of the world's most prominent technology executives publicly acknowledged threats to industrial operations. Elon Musk's warning that silver restrictions are not good because silver is needed in many industrial processes represents unprecedented acknowledgement by a major CEO that resource constraints threaten production capabilities. Musk's public statement reflects private conversations throughout the technology sector where companies discover that silver procurement has shifted from routine purchasing to strategic problem solving, requiring senior management attention. Tesla's operations depend on reliable silver supply for electric vehicle wiring systems, solar panel electrical connections, battery management systems, energy storage equipment, and charging infrastructure. These applications cannot accept substitutes without major performance degradation. The broader technology sector faces similar constraints. Semiconductor manufacturing requires silver for precise electrical connections that must operate reliably for decades. Data center infrastructure depends on silver for power distribution systems that cannot fail. When technology leaders acknowledge resource constraints publicly, it signals that private supply negotiations have failed and companies face production disruptions that threaten business continuity. Musk's warning also reflects recognition that Chinese export restrictions provide competitive advantages to Chinese manufacturers, while constraining international competitors who cannot secure adequate silver supply. The public nature of the warning suggests that private diplomatic channels and industry negotiations have failed to resolve supply access problems, leaving affected companies with no alternative except public pressure campaigns. The AI infrastructure, silver demand, 200 gigawatt crisis. The emerging artificial intelligence sector represents exponential demand growth that threatens to overwhelm available silver supply entirely. Global data center capacity requirements are projected to double from current levels to more than 200 gigawatts by 2030. Each gigawatt of data center capacity requires substantial silver inputs for electrical infrastructure, server components, and power management systems. The United States alone may require 100 to 130 gigawatts of new data center capacity to support artificial intelligence development and deployment plans announced by major technology companies. Meta announced nuclear power contracts totaling 6.6 gigawatts through 2035, while Microsoft, Amazon, and Google committed to over 10 gigawatts of long-term nuclear power agreements to support data center operations. The nuclear power contracts reflect recognition that AI operations require reliable baseload electricity, but nuclear facilities also require silver for reactor control systems and electrical components that cannot accept substitutes. The convergence of artificial intelligence infrastructure demand, data center expansion requirements, and nuclear power development creates silver consumption that compounds across multiple sectors simultaneously. These demand drivers operate independently of silver prices because AI infrastructure represents strategic investments that must be completed regardless of input costs. Companies developing AI capabilities cannot reduce silver consumption in response to higher prices. They must secure supply at whatever cost necessary or abandon development plans that represent their competitive future. The solar panel, multiplication, renewable energy, held hostage. China's silver export restrictions become strategically devastating when considering the renewable energy sector's complete dependence on silver-intensive manufacturing processes. Each solar panel requires approximately 10 to 20 grams of silver for electrical connections that enable photovoltaic cells to function effectively. The silver content cannot be eliminated or significantly reduced without major efficiency losses that make installations economically unviable. Global solar capacity installations continue accelerating at double-digit growth rates, while China controls both solar panel manufacturing and silver supply availability. This creates vertical control over renewable energy infrastructure deployment worldwide. By 2027, solar panel manufacturing will consume more than 200 million ounces of silver annually, representing approximately 20% of total global silver supply availability. China's dominance in solar panel production, combined with export restrictions on silver, creates conditions where renewable energy deployment schedules become subject to Chinese resource allocation decisions. Countries pursuing aggressive renewable energy targets discover that achieving those targets requires silver imports from China on terms that serve Chinese strategic interests rather than international climate objectives. The renewable energy dependence on Chinese silver supply creates leverage where environmental policies become subject to geopolitical considerations that have nothing to do with climate change mitigation. Nations cannot pursue energy independence through renewable energy deployment when the critical materials required come from the same country they seek independence from. Electric vehicle exponential demand, the multiplication factor. Electric vehicle adoption represents another exponential silver demand driver that multiplies consumption far beyond traditional automotive industry requirements. Each electric vehicle requires 3 to 5 times more silver than traditional internal combustion vehicles due to electrical systems, battery management electronics, and power distribution components. The silver multiplication factor means that every traditional vehicle replaced by an electric vehicle increases silver demand by 300 to 500%. Creating exponential consumption growth as EV adoption accelerates globally. China leads both global EV production and domestic EV adoption, meaning expanding Chinese EV manufacturing consumes increasing quantities of silver that would otherwise be available for export. The charging infrastructure required to support EV adoption also requires substantial silver inputs for electrical connections, power management systems, and grid integration equipment that multiplies silver demand beyond the vehicles themselves. Chinese EV manufacturers like BYD, NIO, and XPeng require massive silver inputs for domestic production, that competes directly with export availability for international manufacturers. As global EV adoption accelerates, silver demand growth compounds, while China's export restrictions ensure domestic manufacturers maintain priority access to limited supply. International automakers. Pursuing EV development strategies face silver procurement challenges, while Chinese competitors benefit from secure domestic supply access that provides permanent competitive advantages. The substitution impossibility. Why alternatives don't exist. The critical aspect of China's silver strategy is that it targets a resource with unique physical properties that cannot be effectively substituted in high-performance applications. Silver possesses the highest electrical conductivity of any element, combined with thermal conductivity and antimicrobial properties that make it irreplaceable in precision applications where performance cannot be compromised. Copper can partially substitute for silver in some electrical applications, but with approximately 6% lower conductivity that becomes critical in high-performance electronics, renewable energy systems, and electric vehicle applications. The 6% conductivity difference represents the margin between functional and non-functional performance in precision electronics, where electrical resistance cannot be increased without system failure. Semiconductor manufacturing requires silver's precise electrical properties for connections that must operate reliably for decades without degradation or performance loss over time. Medical applications depend on silver's antimicrobial properties that cannot be replicated with alternative materials, making substitution impossible rather than simply impractical or expensive. The inability to substitute silver in critical applications means that demand remains completely inelastic, regardless of price increases, providing China with maximum leverage over global technology sectors. Companies facing silver shortages cannot switch to alternatives. They must secure silver supply at any cost or cease production of affected products entirely. Central bank awakening. The monetary dimension. Beyond industrial applications, silver is experiencing unprecedented demand from central banks that historically focused exclusively on gold for monetary reserves. For 70 years, central bank precious metals policy followed simple principles: accumulate gold for monetary reserves while treating silver as an industrial commodity without monetary significance. Between 2022 and 2025, global central banks purchased more than 1,000 tons of gold annually while showing minimal interest in silver accumulation for reserve purposes. The traditional focus on gold reflected international monetary system structures that established gold as the primary monetary metal for central bank reserve management. Russia's central bank became the first major central bank to begin systematic silver accumulation as part of monetary reserve diversification strategy designed to reduce dependency on Western-controlled financial systems. Russian silver accumulation serves multiple strategic purposes: monetary diversification away from dollar-denominated assets, sanctions avoidance through non-Western reserve assets, and strategic material security for domestic industrial requirements. The Russian precedent encourages other non-Western central banks to consider silver as both monetary reserve asset and strategic material rather than simple industrial commodity. Emerging market central banks recognize that silver provides monetary properties similar to gold, while also supporting domestic technology manufacturing and industrial development objectives. Central bank silver accumulation creates a new category of inelastic demand that competes with industrial users for limited physical supply while providing official sector legitimacy to silver's monetary functions. The paper market collapse. COMEX faces delivery crisis. The combination of supply restrictions, inventory depletion, and exponential demand growth creates conditions where paper silver markets face potential delivery defaults that could destroy conventional price discovery mechanisms. COMEX and London Bullion Market Association face unprecedented pressure from institutional investors demanding physical delivery of silver contracts rather than cash settlement alternatives. The delivery pressure reflects growing recognition among sophisticated investors that paper contracts may not be backed by adequate physical inventory available for actual delivery. When multiple large institutions simultaneously demand physical conversion of paper positions, exchanges face binary choices: either source physical metal at any cost or declare force majeure and settle contracts in cash rather than silver. Force majeure declarations would destroy confidence in paper silver markets while driving all remaining demand toward physical markets with severely limited supply availability. The threat of cash settlement rather than physical delivery undermines the fundamental purpose of commodity futures markets and drives institutional investors toward direct physical ownership rather than derivative instruments. COMEX faces delivery pressures precisely when global inventory levels are at multi-decade lows and Chinese export restrictions eliminate traditional sources for inventory replenishment. The mathematical impossibility of maintaining derivative markets when underlying physical supply becomes genuinely scarce creates conditions for systemic breakdown of conventional price discovery mechanisms. Once paper markets lose credibility, all silver pricing shifts toward physical markets, where supply scarcity rather than financial engineering determines value relationships. The 500% mathematical inevitability. Understanding why silver appreciation of 500% represents mathematical inevitability rather than speculative projection requires recognizing that current prices reflect paper market manipulation rather than physical supply-demand reality. Shanghai physical silver already trades above $80 per ounce, while COMEX paper contracts remain near $30 to $35, demonstrating that physical markets are repricing towards scarcity values. The $50 spread between physical and paper markets suggests that legitimate physical pricing may already exceed paper prices by 150% or more, indicating that current futures prices dramatically understate silver's real value. If paper markets collapse or lose credibility entirely, global silver pricing would shift toward physical market levels that reflect actual supply availability rather than financial contract manipulation. Industrial demand growth from AI infrastructure, electric vehicles, solar panels, and 5G deployment creates consumption increases that operate independently of price, because these represent strategic investments rather than discretionary purchases. Chinese export restrictions remove 60 to 70% of global refined silver supply from international markets, while domestic Chinese demand continues expanding from manufacturing growth and strategic stockpiling objectives. Central bank accumulation adds official sector demand that competes with industrial users for limited physical supply, while providing monetary legitimacy that supports higher valuation levels. The convergence of inelastic demand growth, supply restrictions, inventory depletion, and paper market breakdown creates multiple compounding pressures that cannot be resolved through conventional market mechanisms. Mathematical modeling based on supply-demand fundamentals, inventory levels, and demand growth trajectories suggests that equilibrium pricing requires silver appreciation to $150 to $200 per ounce to balance available supply with projected consumption. The 500% appreciation from current paper prices represents the mathematical adjustment required to establish a sustainable supply-demand balance in markets where physical scarcity rather than financial engineering determines price relationships. The geopolitical dimension, resource colonialism. China's silver strategy represents a new form of economic warfare that provides technological dominance through resource control rather than direct competition or military pressure. Resource colonialism operates through market mechanisms that appear legitimate while accomplishing strategic objectives that reshape global power relationships and technology development capabilities. By controlling silver supply, China can influence the pace of technological development in other countries, affect the cost structure of international competitors, and determine the strategic priorities of nations dependent on silver imports. Countries pursuing technological independence discover that achieving independence requires resources controlled by the same nation they seek independence from, creating dependency relationships that extend beyond simple trade. China's silver control creates leverage over nations dependent on silver imports for critical technology sectors, effectively providing veto power over industrial development plans and technological advancement strategies. The silver weapon proves more effective than traditional geopolitical pressure because it operates through natural market mechanisms rather than obvious political coercion that would trigger diplomatic resistance. Nations cannot escape silver dependency through diplomatic agreements or alternative suppliers because China controls the fundamental resource required for modern technology functionality across all sectors. The geopolitical effectiveness of resource control stems from its ability to affect entire economies rather than specific companies or industries, making diplomatic solutions inadequate for addressing strategic vulnerabilities. China's approach demonstrates that controlling critical material inputs provides more sustainable dominance than direct technology competition, because it affects all competitors simultaneously while appearing to operate through normal market processes. The strategic revelation: technology control through material control. The ultimate strategic revelation is that China has achieved technological dominance not through superior innovation or manufacturing efficiency, but through systematic control of the material foundation that makes all modern technology possible. Every smartphone, electric vehicle, solar installation, data center, and AI system depends on silver inputs that China can now regulate through export licensing that serves Chinese strategic interests rather than global market efficiency. The technology control extends beyond Chinese companies to international firms that require silver inputs for critical products, creating dependency relationships that affect competitive positioning across entire industries. Resource control provides sustainable competitive advantage because it affects all competitors simultaneously while creating barriers to entry that cannot be overcome through innovation, efficiency improvements, or alternative technologies. China's silver dominance creates path dependency, where other nations must either accept Chinese supply terms or abandon technological development plans that define their economic competitiveness. The revelation exposes that resource security has become more critical than military security for maintaining national technological independence and economic sovereignty in an interconnected global economy. Modern economic warfare operates through resource control mechanisms that appear to function through normal market processes while accomplishing strategic domination objectives that reshape global power relationships permanently. The silver strategy demonstrates that controlling the material foundation of technology provides more effective leverage than competing directly in technology markets, because it affects the ability of all competitors to participate in those markets. The Michael Oliver Technical Analysis, Historical Precedent for 300% Gains. The most sophisticated technical analysis of silver's price potential comes from momentum structure analysis that compares current conditions to historical precedents of commodity market breakouts during resource scarcity periods. Momentum structure analysis. Michael Oliver has identified silver as entering a new structural price paradigm that could produce triple-digit appreciation similar to historical commodity breakouts during supply constraint periods. Oliver's analysis focuses on structural breakouts from multi-decade price ranges rather than conventional technical indicators, emphasizing fundamental supply-demand imbalances that force price discovery into new equilibrium ranges. The historical precedent Oliver cites is copper's performance in 2005 to 2006, when Chinese stockpiling drove prices from approximately $1.50 per pound to over $4 per pound within 12 months, representing 300% appreciation. Copper's 2005 breakout provides a template for understanding how Chinese resource accumulation strategies can drive extreme price appreciation in critical industrial metals over short time frames. The copper precedent demonstrates that when China decides to systematically accumulate critical materials, global pricing mechanisms break down and new price paradigms emerge through supply-demand imbalances that cannot be resolved through financial engineering. Silver's current situation may produce more dramatic results than copper's 2005 experience because silver faces both Chinese demand growth and Chinese export restrictions simultaneously, creating double pressure on global supply availability. Oliver's momentum analysis suggests that silver is positioned for structural price breakout that could establish new trading ranges in triple-digit territory, similar to other commodities that experience Chinese-driven supply-demand imbalances. The technical analysis reinforces fundamental supply-demand projections by identifying price structure patterns that historically preceded major commodity market repricing events during resource scarcity periods. The final warning: physical ownership as economic independence. For silver holders, the revelation demands immediate strategic positioning before physical scarcity makes defensive measures impossible and paper markets complete their breakdown process. The window for acquiring physical silver at current manipulated prices is closing rapidly as industrial users compete for dwindling supply and paper markets face delivery pressures that threaten systemic breakdown. Physical silver ownership provides protection against supply chain disruptions, currency debasement, geopolitical weaponization of strategic resources, and the collapse of paper-based price discovery mechanisms. The choice facing silver holders is stark: secure physical metal now, while it remains available at artificially suppressed paper prices, or face the reality that China's master plan has transformed silver into a controlled strategic resource available only at premium prices. Physical silver represents the only asset class that provides complete independence from financial systems that can be weaponized during geopolitical conflicts, while offering exposure to the most critical industrial material of the technology age. The 500% revelation isn't speculation about future possibilities, it's mathematical documentation of supply-demand imbalances that no amount of financial engineering or policy intervention can overcome. China's master plan has succeeded in ways that exceed even their strategic objectives. The silver market has been weaponized. Current prices reflect manipulation rather than physical reality. The revelation is complete. The historical pattern is clear. The mathematical outcome is inevitable. China has accomplished what no empire in history achieved: control over the material foundation of technological civilization itself. The master plan is exposed. The 500% revelation is confirmed. The opportunity for defensive action is closing. Because once the world comprehends the full scope of what China accomplished, current silver prices will exist only in historical memory. The age of paper silver pricing is ending. The era of physical scarcity pricing has begun. And in that new era, silver isn't just a precious metal. It's technological independence itself.